A Caribbean cruise is the perfect dream vacation, but nobody is talking about what's actually happening there now. Many unprepared cruisers are dealing with everything from massive crowds to unsafe ports. If you're even thinking of planning a Caribbean cruise, you have to see this so you won't be disappointed. I'm Gary with Optimal Cruising, bringing you fresh cruise advice, money-saving hacks, and secret strategies the cruise lines don't advertise. Let's get started. When I was cruising in the Caribbean 20 years ago, it was a lot more low-key than it is today. It felt a lot less crowded. Because the Caribbean is a big moneymaker for cruise lines, more cruise lines are basing ships there. Even some European lines are now basing ships in the Caribbean during the summer season. And when cruise ships come out with their newer, bigger, latest ships, they tend to park them in the Caribbean, which means newer ships, bigger ships, more ships, it all adds up to more people. And in some of these ports, it just feels like too much. If you go to Cozumel or Nassau on a typical cruise day, you're going to have 5 to 8 other ships there in port with you, and all of them could be carrying between 5 and 8,000 people. That's crazy. One way I avoid this is I always look at my itinerary before I book, and I look for particular ports that are either tender ports or ports that don't have the capacity to handle a ton of ships at the same time. You can find these by doing a little research. For example, although they seem to be building a huge dock there, Belize is still a tender port, and they don't handle as many ships at one time, and it certainly doesn't feel as cramped as some of the other cruise ports. The Cayman Islands, which is getting more crowded, is still a tender port, which makes it feel less crowded. And then I look for smaller, lesser-known cruise ports like Dominica, Grenada, Guadalupe. They're on some itineraries, but not most. And so if you find an itinerary with those cruise ports, you're going to face much fewer people there. And another thing I do is I typically book my Caribbean cruises during the off-season or the shoulder season, which can be like April or May or September through November. That's when it's not as popular, so there's less people going. And also there aren't as many ships there because ships are transferring to and from the Mediterranean during those times. And so there are less ships docking at the Caribbean ports. Now this next trend leaves kind of an artificial taste in your mouth. I've noticed a growing trend over the last decade or two of cruise lines pushing for artificial port development. They push these countries in the Caribbean to build artificial port complexes, which are kind of like mega malls, almost like Mall of America type places with rides or water features and other things you can do there so that you almost don't even have to leave the port. A huge example of this is Costa Maya. Anybody who's cruised the Western Caribbean has undoubtedly stopped here. And this is one of those ports that they built specifically to give another place for cruise ships to go, and it's a huge money grab. There's really nothing else there but this mega complex that they built for the cruise ships. This can be good and bad. I've spoken with a number of cruisers who really like to go to a resort on vacation. That's why they book a cruise. It's a floating resort, and then they like to get to a port and get off and try out a new resort. But the problem with these man-made resorts is they take the place of the authentic feel in the Caribbean. And that's what's missing for a lot of cruisers these days who are looking to get out there and see that. It's still possible, but requires a little work and planning. Let's take my Costa Maya example. If you get off the ship there and you want a more authentic experience, you want to go into the Mexican town of Mahahual. It is a lot more what the old style ports used to feel like. There's a lot of vendors there selling handmade crafts, rugs, all kinds of things. And there is a beach there and there is food there that's not all that expensive. So that's one way you can get around these artificial ports. You just have to push through them and find a way to explore the actual town. But in many cases, cruise lines are even going above and beyond these artificial port complexes. When you go on a cruise, are you looking for more of a resort-style experience, or do you prefer to explore the cultures at the ports of call? Let me know in the comments below. The bottom line I've found for cruise lines is they need more places to go and more ways to keep revenue in their pockets. And that's why they're building more and more beach clubs these days and private islands. They're essentially the same concept. The private island is just a small island, typically in the Bahamas, that the cruise line owns. The latest one that was really constructed and built out of almost a wasteland is MSC's Ocean Cay, which in my opinion, they did a really good job with this one. But every major cruise line these days has a private island in the Bahamas, and then they're building more of these private beach clubs. Especially Royal Caribbean has bought up a lot of land in Mexico, in the Bahamas, and other areas around the world to build these private beach clubs so that they can dock at these ports and funnel their passengers directly to their own revenue stream. And that's why cruise lines love these things, because anything you spend on that private island or at their beach club is money going right into their pockets. And again, this does go both ways. Sometimes I'm looking for a more just relaxing resort vacation. And in that case, private islands or beach clubs are great on the itinerary. But if you're looking for a more authentic Caribbean cultural experience, you want to look for itineraries that either don't include the private islands or that are long enough to hit a number of other ports so you get that diversity of culture. And then there's a somewhat alarming trend that you need to watch out for. One particular island in the Caribbean where Royal Caribbean had built one of these beach clubs and had been taking their cruise ships to for some time is Labadee, Haiti. And unfortunately, right now, the U.S. State Department has issued a do not travel advisory for that entire country. And there have been increasing alerts for many countries throughout the Caribbean. You can see the map here. The levels of risk go from blue to red with increasing advisories of caution. As islands get put on this warning list, cruise ships are starting to avoid them. And if you have one of these islands on your cruise itinerary that has an elevated risk level, that might be the place to take extra precaution. Maybe make sure you book an excursion with a licensed provider ahead of time. We have some links there in our description so that you know when you get there, you know what you're doing, and you're not dealing with people you don't know or aren't familiar with. One of the big problems I've run into at some of these ports is unlicensed tours. So you get off the ship and there's just a guy with a van or a guy with a taxi, and he's telling you he can give you a tour of this or that part of the city that maybe you were interested in, but he's not really licensed and you don't know who he is or what else he has in mind. One of the biggest scams going on now has to do with these drivers. So a van driver or a taxi driver will get you into their car promising to take you on a tour or take you somewhere to a beach you want to go, but on the way they want to stop and have you go and look in a few shops. Maybe if you mention you're hungry or want a drink, they're going to take you to a particular place where they get a kickback or a commission, and it's probably not the best place to go. You can avoid this scam in two ways. Number one, always set your price up front if you're going to take a taxi. Don't just get in and wait for him to tell you the price. And number two, if you are planning to do something that requires a taxi, plan it out ahead of time. Don't go by the taxi guy's advice. Know where you want to go. You want to go to a shop? Know which one you want to go to. You want to go to a beach? Know which one you want to go to. Same thing for a restaurant, because then you've looked it up ahead of time. You know what you're getting. You're not trusting their advice, which could be good, but could be misleading. And then another scam that cruise lines keep really hush-hush is those port shopping talks that they do on the cruise ship. Those are put together to generate commission and income for the cruise lines. And in fact, all of the shops on those lists pay the cruise line money to be on that list. They're only being recommended because they paid for that recommendation. I still absolutely love cruising in the Caribbean. It is one of the most magical places. And with a little planning, you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. You can do it the way you want to do it. Now, I know some cruisers are going to say, I like those private islands. I like those resort feel beach clubs, and that's great. Book cruises that go specifically to those places. But if you want a more cultural experience or you want to see raw natural beaches, then you want to look for ports of call that don't have the artificial built up ports and the artificial beach clubs or private islands. But if you want a more cultural experience, or maybe you like to see more nature, raw, natural beaches, then you want to avoid those ports with just the built-up attractions right there. Instead of just going with an itinerary the cruise line throws at you, find out where you really want to go. Do you like the beaches on St. Martin? Make sure your itinerary includes St. Martin. Do you like Aruba? Make sure it includes Aruba. Find the right itinerary for you and you'll have a much better time. I'll tell you how to make an easy plan and avoid some of the traps in the Caribbean right here.